Hello everyone and welcome back to week 3 of our virtual reading lessons. So today we are ready to read from chapter 5. So if you still need to finish off the end of chapter 3 or 4, then make sure you pause here and go and make sure you're ready to go with us today. So I've got all my equipment. I've got my ruler, my highlighter, my coloured pens. So if you can make sure that before you start reading at home independently, you have all these things so that you can make notes, you can clarify tricky words with your highlighter, you can write down any answers to questions, and you can make predictions and summarise points. So also make sure, really good idea, that you have your online dictionary up alongside the reading so that you can clarify those tricky words. Okay, so as said, we are on chapter 5 today. Before we do that, we are going to do our quick quiz, just like last week. So I have 4 questions for you, and I've also written down what pages you can find the answers. Okay, so which 6 people visit Katniss after the reaping? So after Katniss has volunteered herself, which 6 people are allowed to go and visit her at the Justice House? That can be found on page 32 to 37. Question 2, what bird is on the pin given to Katniss by Madge? That's page 40. So if you remember, Madge was the girl Katniss knows from school, and she's a bit of an outsider like Katniss because her father was the mayor of District 12, which means that she always had food, she was well dressed, which stood out because we know people were very poor there and struggled to survive. Question 3 is, what does Haymitch do to Peter Mellark at breakfast? So when they are on the train going to the capital, what does Haymitch do to Peter Mellark? Page 53. And finally, how does Katniss describe the capital? Page 56. So there's a really nice description on page 56 when Katniss sees the capital for the first time. So there's a paragraph of description there. And one of the tasks that would be really good for you to do when you've finished this video for an extra task is to use that paragraph and try and draw the capital. So a little bit of art for you there. So there's lots of nice descriptions. I think it's really a good way for you to imagine what it looks like. I know I would like to draw the setting so it brings it to life in my mind, and it also really helps you understand the quotes from the text. So how does Katniss describe the capital? Okay, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer those questions. In the meantime, if you want, you can pause the video and then find the answers on those pages if you want to go back, help you remember chapter 3 and 4. So pause it if you need to and then replay, and I'll be going through the answers in 30 seconds. Okay, I'm going to go through the answers then. So the answer to number 1 was the 6 people that visit Katniss are Mum, Prim, her little sister, Peter Mellark's father. So if you remember, Peter Mellark is the other tribute who is representing District 12 with Katniss. And his father, the baker, he went and he said, I will look after Prim, I'll make sure she's eating, which shows a certain kindness. Gale, who is Katniss's friend that she was hunting with that morning, and Madge, who we've already mentioned, who is the mayor's daughter. And she gifted Katniss with a pin, sort of a good luck memento. So question 2, the name of the bird on the pin Madge gives Katniss is a mockingjay. So if you remember, a mockingjay is a mutation of a mockingbird, which we have, and the jabberjay, which was a bird created by the capital that they used to send out to the districts because it could memorise what people were saying. So it was like a spy, and then it used to go and report back to the capital. So the two mixed together create this mockingjay, which I think if you sing a song, it can remember that song and repeat it. So what does Haymitch do to Peter Mellark at breakfast? So he punches him in the jaw. So Haymitch, who is one of the only 2 people who won the Hunger Games from District 12 in the past, he has been assigned to be Katniss and Peter's mentor, and he has a few problems, one of which being his alcohol addiction. And whilst he's drinking at breakfast, Peter smashes his glass out of his hand. Hamish obviously gets very cross at that, and he punches Peter on the jaw. And he says actually it was tactical, because when the media and press see that bruise on Peter, they'll think he's tough. He's a tough guy. He can stand up for himself in a fight, which is good for the Hunger Games. But it also makes us worried about what type of guy they've got as a mentor. So how does Katniss describe the Capitol? Okay, so I'm going to go to page 56, find that paragraph. So it says, if anything, they have not quite captured the magnificence of the glistening buildings in a rainbow of hues that tower into the air, the shiny cars that roll down the wide paved streets, the oddly dressed people with bizarre hair and painted faces who have never missed a meal. All the colours seem artificial. So I've underlined that and put that means fake. Because I think whilst this place sounds magnificent, has glistening buildings, rainbow of hues. Hues means colours and tones. So that's an art term you might have heard of. So it means different colours. The pink's too deep, the green's too bright, the yellow's painful to the eyes, like the flat round discs of hard candy we can never afford to buy at the tiny sweet shop in District 12. So when I've been reading this, I've been thinking, it sounds quite magical. However, it sounds very artificial. It sounds like a toy town. It sounds gaudy. So this word gaudy, this is something that's too much. It's over the top. It's a bit extra. So it almost makes you feel uncomfortable. It's too lavish and luxurious, especially when we put that in a stark contrast. Put stark contrast here. So this world, the Capitol, seems like such a stark contrast to the rest of the districts where people are starving and hunting to survive. So I said it's almost grotesque. It's a bit grotesque. It's a bit disgusting how lucky the people here are compared to what we know, like people that live like Katniss. So this is the paragraph that maybe you could recreate afterwards as an art task. So that was Katniss's first impression of the Capitol. Okay, so I'm going to put the quick quiz away. Hopefully you did well. I'm going to do another quick quiz next week, which will be based on the chapters I give you to read today. So as I said, we're going to start reading chapter 5 today on page 57. Let me just rearrange my camera and block the light out. Okay, so we're going to read chapter 5. So hopefully that's a better view. So I'm just going to think, before we start, we're going to be focusing on those reading skills today, predicting, clarifying, questioning, summarising. So I just want you to predict from the end of last chapter where it says, Peter Mellock, the boy who gave me the bread, is fighting hard to kill me. I just want you to predict, do you think actually, yes, he is. He's got a huge game plan. He is trying to show that he's tough. He's also trying to be kind to Katniss to perhaps lure her into a false sense of security. Do we agree with that? Or do we think, no, actually, he's a truly honourable guy, he's a good guy, and he is actually somehow trying to make sure they both survive? What do we think? So what kind of character do we predict Peter Mellock is, Katniss's other tribute from District 12? So write that down. Okay, so I've done that. And I wrote, I predict Peter is a truly honourable character. So I think actually he's a good guy. Okay, let's start reading. So, chapter 5. Rip. I grit my teeth as Venia, who I said there is the stylist when they've arrived at the Capitol. A woman with aqua hair and gold tattoos over her eyebrows. So as they said they had bizarre hair. So she's got this kind of bizarre greeny blue hair. And she has gold tattoos above her eyebrows, which, again, sounds quite futuristic, doesn't it? It doesn't sound necessarily the norm in 2020. So it's quite futuristic. Yanks a strip of fabric from my leg, tearing out the hair beneath it. Sorry, she pipes in her silly capital accent. You're just so hairy. So it sounds like Katniss is getting her legs waxed as soon as she's arrived. So just to go back, when you see punctuation like this, the hyphens here are to drag the word out. And then obviously we've got this exclamation mark, which means you put emphasis on it. So if you're reading that, you would sort of say, rip. And that's when you're reading aloud to try and create drama, effect. Those are the sort of punctuation things look out for to help you bring the text to life. Why do these people speak in such a high pitch? Why do their jaws barely open when they talk? Why do the ends of their sentences go up as if they're asking a question? Odd vowels, clipped words, and always a hiss on the letter S. No wonder it's impossible not to mimic them. So mimic means copy. And I just think, what technique is the author using here when she's saying, why do they do that? Why do they do that? I'm sure lots of you know this, so I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to write down what technique is being used here. Give you the initials to help you. So, yep, Katniss is asking herself some rhetorical questions. So the writer uses them to make us, the reader, think about the same questions. So as I'm reading that, I think, why do they speak in such high pitch? Why do their jaws barely open when they talk? So I think there's some sort of robots. They remind me of robots. So I'm going to put, are they robotic? Are they conditioned, which means like brainwashed by the capital? Can they not think for themselves? So if you remember last time we discussed the genre of this, and it's a dystopian text, which means a nightmare world. And in dystopian texts, so nightmare worlds in the future, robotic people that are controlled by others is definitely a feature. Back to the book. Venia makes what's supposed to be a sympathetic face. Good news though, this is the last one. Ready? I get a grip on the edges of the table I'm seated on and nod. The final swathe of my leg hair is uprooted in a painful jerk. I've been in the remake centre for more than 3 hours. So it's quite ironic this. So I guess we'd call it a makeover. They've called it a remake. So they completely make them into new people. And I still haven't met my stylist. Oh, so Venia perhaps is not the stylist. Apparently, he has no interest in seeing me until Venia and the other members of my prep team have addressed some obvious problems. This has included scrubbing down my body with a gritty loam that has removed not only dirt, but at least 3 layers of skin, turning my nails into uniform shapes, and primarily ridding my body of hair. My legs, arms, torso, underarms, and parts of my eyebrows have been stripped of the muff, leaving me like a plucked bird ready for roasting. I don't like it. So we'll focus a little bit on language techniques. So leaving me like a plucked bird. So that's another language technique. It describes how Katniss feels. She feels a bit ready to be roasted in the oven. So what language technique is that? So it's a simile. So again, the author uses that to sort of give us, perhaps create humour, but also so we understand further how the character feels. We understand that she feels exposed and vulnerable because she's just lying there like a plucked bird. I don't like it. My skin feels sore and tingling and intensely vulnerable. There's that word, vulnerable. So she feels exposed. She feels, to be vulnerable means that you're exposed to being harmed. So she feels weak and she feels perhaps like she could be harmed, which obviously in this current situation she needs to feel strong in that when she's about to embark upon the Hunger Games. But I've kept my side of the bargain with Haymitch and no objection has crossed my lips. So if you want to clarify the word objection, or if you already know what it means and can replace it with a similar word, that's fine. So what does objection mean? Search it up and then write down if you know. Okay, so an objection is when you say no to something. So she has been good and she's gone along with everything. You're doing very well, says some guy named Flavius. He gives his orange corkscrew locks a shake and applies a fresh coat of purple lipstick to his mouth. There's that bizarre fashion makeup sense again. If there's one thing we can't stand, it's a whiner. Grease her down. Venia and Octavia, a plump woman whose entire body has been dyed a pale shade of pea green, rub me down with a lotion that first stings but then soothes my raw skin. Okay, so we've got this bizarre appearances, haven't we? So Octavia has dyed her skin green. Sounds a bit mad. This guy's got orange hair. Then they pull me from the table, removing the thin robe I've been allowed to wear off and on. I stand there completely naked as the three circle me, wielding tweezers to remove any last bits of hair. I know I should be embarrassed, but they're so unlike people that I'm no more self-conscious than if a trio of oddly coloured birds were pecking around my feet. The three step back and admire their work. Excellent. You almost look like a human being now, says Flavius, and they all laugh. I force my lips up into a smile to show how grateful I am. Thank you, I say sweetly. We don't have much cause to look nice in District 12. So Katniss is acting here. She's acting at being sweet when really, I imagine she's feeling quite annoyed by saying you almost look like a human being now. It's very derogatory, isn't it? It's very patronising. Because by no means has Katniss probably ever had time or money to spend on how nice she looks when she's just trying to feed her family most days. This wins them over completely. Of course you don't, you poor darling, says Octavia, clasping her hands together in distress for me. But don't worry, says Venia. By the time Cinna is through with you, you're going to be absolutely gorgeous. We promise. You know, now that we've gotten rid of all the hair and filth, you're not horrible at all, says Flavius encouragingly. Let's call Cinna. So yet again, probably meant to be nice, but you're not horrible at all. Sounds quite mean, doesn't it? Sounds quite cruel, really. So they're quite shallow, which means focused only on appearance, not who people are inside. So they're shallow and focused only on appearance. So when you're focused only on what you can see, not the inside of not what someone's like on the inside. They dart out of the room. It's hard to hate my prep team. They're such total idiots. And yet, in an odd way, I know they're sincerely trying to help me. I look at the cold white walls and floor and resist the impulse to retrieve my robe. But this Cinna, my stylist, will surely make me remove it at once. So this word, when you're reading independently, you might be tempted to say kinna because of that vowel. But as we know, a k sound can also make a s sound. So remember that in words, like cycle, circle, we see a k at the beginning of words making that s sound. Instead, my hands go to my hairdo, the one area of my body my prep team had been told to leave alone. My fingers stroke the silky braids my mother so carefully arranged. My mother. I left her blue dress and shoes on the floor of my train car, never thinking about retrieving them, of trying to hold on to a piece of her. Of home. Now I wish I had. So what emotion is Katniss feeling here? It's one of the beginnings of no. I'm going to see if you can get that one yourself. So what emotion is she thinking as she thinks about home? So I was thinking of nostalgia. So that's when you look back and you think fondly of the past. So she's becoming fonder to her mother. So you think fondly of the past. The door opens and a young man who must be Cinna enters. I'm taken aback by how normal he looks. Most of the stylists they interview on television are so dyed, stenciled and surgically altered they're grotesque. Okay, so there is that tricky word grotesque. Okay, So if you want to search up what grotesque means on your computer, and see what your definition is. I'm also doing that. So something grotesque is something that's comically repulsive, ugly and distorted. Okay, so it's almost funny, which is what we've perhaps found with some of these characters. So it's comically disgusting, ugly, repulsive. But Cinna's close-cropped hair appears to be its natural shade of brown. He's in a simple black shirt and pants. So he's not in his pants. Remember, this is an American book, and pants means trousers in American English. The only concession, I'm just going to put that there. The only concession to self-alteration seems to be metallic gold eyeliner that has been applied with a light hand. It brings out the flecks of gold in his eyes, his green eyes, sorry. And despite my disgust with the capital and their hideous fashions, I can't help thinking how attractive it looks. Hello, Katniss. I'm Cinna, your stylist, he says in a quiet voice, somewhat lacking in the capital's affectations. So affectations is when you put something on. So the capital's accent is fake. You put it on. Hello, I venture cautiously. So with caution, cautiously, this adverb because it has ly at the end and it describes the way she ventures, the way she says something. She cautiously means carefully. So remember, Katniss doesn't know who she can trust. Just give me a moment, all right, he asks. He walks around my naked body, not touching me, but taking in every inch of it with his eyes. I resist the impulse to cross my arms over my chest. Who did your hair? My mother, I say. It's beautiful, classic really, and in almost perfect balance with your profile. She has very clever fingers, he says. I had expected someone flamboyant, so I'm just going to pause on this adjective, flamboyant. So again, this means extra, it means something over the top, OTT. Someone older, trying desperately to look young, someone who viewed me as a piece of meat to be prepared for a platter. So it sort of links earlier to when she said that she was feeling like a plucked chicken ready to be roasted. So she feels vulnerable. She feels like an animal that, a bit like the animal she hunts, she's just prey, because we obviously know what the Hunger Games. So she feels like vulnerable prey. Cinna has met none of these expectations. You're new, aren't you? I don't think I've seen you before, I say. Most of the stylists are familiar, constants in the ever-changing pool of tributes. Some have been around my whole life. Yes, this is my first year in the games, says Cinna. So they gave you District 12, I say. Newcomers generally end up with us, the least desirable district. I asked for District 12, he says without further explanation. Why don't you put on your robe and we'll have a chat? Pulling on my robe, I followed him through a door into a sitting room. 2 red couches face off over a low table. 3 walls are blank. The 4th is entirely glass, providing a window to the city. I can see by the light that it must be around noon, although the sunny sky has turned overcast. Cinna invites me to sit on one of the couches and takes his place across from me. He presses a button on the side of the table. The top splits, and from below rises a second tabletop that holds our lunch. Chicken and chunks of oranges cooked in a creamy sauce laid on a bed of pearly white grain. Tiny green peas and onions, rolls shaped like flowers, and for dessert a pudding the colour of honey. So we've got lots of colour imagery throughout this chapter to bring the capital to life. We've had so much colour imagery. So again, if you want to draw anything but around the side on paper, go for it. So I'm just going to highlight some of that colour imagery. Pudding the colour of honey makes it sound really luxurious and yummy. Tiny green peas, chunks of orange, white grain. So really vivid colours, haven't we? We had red couches. sunny sky. So almost it makes you think this place is quite dreamy, quite magical, but then we know that what's going to take place there is a dystopian, evil, brutal Olympic style games. Okay, I'm going to pause there on page 60. And your homework for next week is to read to the end of chapter 6, okay? So I think that's page 80. So reading to the end of chapter 6, this is your homework. So I'm going to start reading chapter 7 next week on your video. Okay, there'll be a quick quiz at the beginning, and I might set you another task. So if you do want to do a task this time, it would be great if you did that art task to recreate the setting of the Capitol. So next week, homework, end of chapter 6. And just remember, when you're at home reading independently for 20 minutes every day, make sure you're prepared. Make sure you are summarising what you've read. Today we've summarised that it's this vivid place that sounds magical, but we know actually it's got a really dystopian side. Make sure you're asking yourself questions and clarifying those tricky words. Okay, I'll be recording next week for our 4th instalment. Thanks, guys.